in which Tony is rightfully concerned. Part 3 of the In Other News, The Avengers Don't Know What a Spidey Sense Is series. Written by mauvera, read by Alexis. Summary. Tony never did figure out how he came to care for the Spider-Kid, but it happened. And now he has to deal with everything that comes with mentoring a teenage superhero who has some freaky sixth sense that only tells him that there is danger, but never seems to mention when Peter is directly in it. Seriously, how did the kid not even notice that he was on fire? "Hey, Mr. Stark!" the kid called out. Tony ducked to avoid a blast aimed at his head. How the hell these rookies had gotten access to Chitauri tech was beyond him. S.H.I.E.L.D. had assured him after the whole Tombs shit show they were on it. But judging by the fact the wall behind him just collapsed with one of the apparently taken care of weapons, he figured it was entirely possible S.H.I.E.L.D. was just full of shit. He retaliated with a blast from his repulsors, melting the weapons in the hands of the idiot who thought it would be a good idea to shoot at Iron Man. "Mr. Stark, my spidey sense is going crazy right now." Tony suppressed a sigh. "Yeah, kid, it's almost like you're in the middle of a fight." Actually, that was a good point. How the hell did he even know to get here? Was it his friend again? The one that had hacked at Tony's suit? Ted? Red? Fred? Yeah, it was probably Fred. Had Fred gone off and connected to Friday to find out where Tony was? Ah, God, did that mean Tony had to go have a word with the child? Who did they even think he was? For someone who couldn't remember how he'd even gotten roped into this babysitting gig, he sure had to interact with far too many teenagers. "Mr. Stark, I really think something might be wrong." Fine. Tony turned to face him and halted in place immediately. He watched in abject horror as Spider-Man faced down 3 separate guys who were shooting at him. The only thing that stopped him dying on the spot was that they had all apparently been trained by stormtroopers, seeing as all they managed to hit was the giant brick wall behind the kid. Whatever small relief that fact may have given him, it was immediately and entirely overwhelmed by the significantly more important fact that the kid had a spear. Well, he had no doubt that Peter would most certainly refer to that as totally awesome. Tony was much more preoccupied with where that spear was, what with it currently being lodged inside of the kid's leg. Peter somehow seemed yet to notice the weapon jammed inside his thigh, but good God, how? Before he let himself just internally combust, Tony was jolted into movement when another of the idiots aimed at the kid. So Tony decided to just say fuck it to his initial attempt to take these guys in without any major damage, and decided instead that the logical course of action was just to fly right into them. He crashed the Iron Man armor right into the closest of the 3, a domino effect taking down the other 2. Nobody could blame him if there were 1 or 2 unnecessarily broken bones. "Well, Mr. Stark, that was super cool. But you're kind of crushing that guy. You might want to back off a bit," Peter chirped, far too happily considering the situation. "Kid, stop talking." If nothing else, Tony could be thankful that Peter trusted him enough to go against his nature and be quiet for the first time in his life. Seriously, did the kid ever stop talking? He'd kept up a conversation the entire time they'd been fighting. "Hey, Mr. Stark?" Oh wow, that was almost a whole minute of silence while Tony was busy freaking out about how to address the spear in his leg. "Mr. Stark, my spidey sense is like going off right now, but I don't know where it's coming from, so we should probably get out of here or maybe check the perimeter. Something's up." Okay, Tony could admit the kid was smart, but damn, he was also a bit of a dumbass. Subtlety didn't really seem to be the way to go in this instance. "Kid, you got stabbed." Peter looked blankly at him. "In your leg. Peter, there is a spear in your leg." "Oh." "Oh. You are feeling all right there, buddy?" Tony was at a bit of a loss. What did one say to a teenager that had just gotten impaled and was so distracted by some weird 6th super sense that he didn't even notice? Was there a protocol for it or something like that? Had anyone written a guidebook? Should he? Yeah, it's cool, Peter said, far too nonchalantly, and instead of reacting like a sane person, he just inspected the spear for a moment, snapped the barbed end off, and just yanked it right out of his leg, hissing through his teeth. Tony watched in horror. That was gross. Peter, however, decided to just stare into the distance, realization dawning across his face. Hey, Mr. Stark, I bet that's what my spidey sense was warning me about. Holy shit. This kid. Spider-Man, behind you! Cap's voice rang out over the comms. In the middle of the fight, Tony felt his heart constrict at those words. Shooting one final blast from his repulsors, he whirled in place, the jets at his feet pushing him higher into the sky, which he was immediately grateful for, because from there he could look out over the battlefield. Friday was already scanning and locating Peter's tracker, directing Tony's eyes to the small red and blue figure that was dancing away from a spray of bullets. Tony was already about to make his way over, when his attention was caught by a missile headed straight for him. Damn it. No matter how much he wanted to go over to the kid, he had to focus on the immediate threat before him. He tried to stay calm, secure in the knowledge that the kid wasn't defenseless, and judging by that small glimpse of him that Tony had gotten, the spidey sense thing was working out all right. Peter had been effectively dodging the hail of ammunition with his back turned, a trick which had never stopped being eerie. He'd seen the kid fight before like that, working on nothing but pure instinct, which, yeah, was a bit impressive, but not exactly a recommended battle strategy. He used to try and encourage the kid to work in reality, back when he was still skeptical of just how much power he had truly gained from that spider. But maybe it was all right, he thought, shooting a repulsor beam straight down the middle of the tank. Truly, Hydra must be full of idiots, Tony thought, because they thought it was a genuinely good idea to stage an attack on New York with a couple of tanks and a few hundred men, as though New York wasn't the city with the highest population of superheroes just lying around. Dumbasses, the lot of them. His thoughts were pulled back at the sound of conversation filling up his comms. Hey guys, something's up, Spider-Man said far too cheerily. Tony refused to acknowledge the heavy breath of relief he let out at the confirmation that Peter was all right. Spider-Man, you... Steve's voice was full of concern. Steve was a soldier. He didn't get concerned in the field. Shit. That meant something was wrong, and Tony was just about willing to bet half his fortune that it had something to do with Peter. When didn't it? Tony blasted another battalion that was heading his way before he pushed off, jetting back towards the centre of the fray where his teammates resided. It didn't take too long for him to notice the problem. Kid, move! Clint hissed, clearly also having spotted the gigantic, obvious, entirely unmissable sight of a 20-story building toppling over. That being said, Spider-Man continued to stand there, missing it. No, seriously guys, my spider sense is giving me some real vibes right now. Peter continued to chatter, somehow oblivious to the shattering and cracking of the building's foundation behind him as he continued to fight earnestly. I know you don't think it's real, but I swear something big is about to happen. Thank God the kid finally shut up. And people said Tony wasn't grateful for the little things in life. He would be lying if he said his heart wasn't still pounding anxiety coursing through his veins as he lifted back off the ground, Peter clutched firmly in his arms. Hey! He exclaimed, indignant at being carried without warning. Mr. Stark, what gives? I had that guy. Holy shit. How did he even manage to make it so clear he was pouting when wearing that mask? Kid, Tony breathed harshly, swerving mid-air to avoid another incoming attack, but always putting himself between the bullets and Peter's fragile, stupid body. You ever heard of watching out? Because you nearly just got squashed like the bug you are. Okay, first of all, I'm an arachnid, and second, why would I be It was at that moment Peter's eyes finally alighted upon the crashing avalanche of building and rubble, landing right where he had been standing moments before. Oh. He trailed off. Christ, kid, do me a favour and just look out for once, will you? Tony could barely contain the relief that seeped into his voice without permission. It would be a waste of a perfectly good suit if you went and got crushed. Okay, so he knew no one would believe that was his only reason for caring about Peter's incredibly imminent demise. But he had a reputation to maintain. And anyway, it was far easier to focus on literally anything other than the image he now had seared into his mind of Spider-Man oblivious to the danger that was bearing down on him, helpless to stop it. "He's all right," Clint said shortly. Apparently some people were better than others at containing their worry for the kid, but the fact that he'd even asked means Clint must have been pretty damn stressed out. As any reasonable person is when a giant building is about to fall on a child. "Yeah, I'm cool," Peters chirped. "Just, maybe you could let me down now, Mr. Stark? I'm kinda useless up here, you know." Tony ignored the few sniggers of his teammates at Tony's overprotective nature. Instead, he began to sink back to the ground, carefully mapping out the least likely place for an idiotic teenage superhero to get killed by his own inattentiveness. "Okay, kid, happy trails and all that." But before he could race off back to the fight, Tony shot out an ironclad hand to hold him in place a moment longer. "But if you don't pay attention to what's going on around you, you're out of here, all right?" It was the type of question where everyone knew there was only really one right answer. "Okay, Mr. Stark," Peter said, pausing a moment before adding, "but I was totally right that something was happening." And with a laugh, he sped off, escaping both Tony's grasp and his glare. Damn kid. Tony was happy. Nothing terrible had happened in 3 days. Pepper had just come back from a business meeting in France. The Avengers hadn't blown anything up in a while. Overall, things were good. Which was probably why when he got an alert from Friday that there was some baby monitor footage he should look at, his mind didn't immediately jump to the worst conclusions possible. Perhaps Peter had been out there helping old ladies and done something unusually heroic. Maybe Friday just wanted Tony to see Peter succeed at his whole friendly neighborhood Spider-Man's chick. Those thoughts were immediately expelled when the footage began to play, and Tony saw from Peter's perspective that he was being held at gunpoint. Fuck. His heart began racing immediately as he leapt from his bed. Already a suit was forming around him without him having to tear his gaze from the video. As metal encased his body, he watched and heard Peter's interactions. "Hey guys, what's up? Not much? That's cool. Except, man, this is gonna be embarrassing for you. But you seem to be robbing a bank, and I gotta tell you guys, that's a little bit illegal." The robbers didn't react to Peter's light-hearted conversation, their glares obvious even through the masks on their faces. Tony, for one, was too busy trying to remember to breathe to really focus on the words. Not that it particularly mattered what sort of reaction he was getting, because Peter just carried on. "Yeah, what a shame, right? Turns out we can't all just take whatever we want when it belongs to other people. Because seriously, guys, I would have like 1 billion ice creams. Just all the time. So like, I get where you're coming from, but also no, obviously not. Seriously, why did you think this was a good idea? You know, Spider-Man is in Queens, so did you really think I'd just miss this whole bank robbery situation?" Tony struggled to control his breathing. Although the suit was carrying him as fast as possible to Peter's location, he really couldn't trust the kid wouldn't provoke someone to shooting him before Tony got a chance to get there first. Aunt Lottie would seriously not be a big fan of him if he let that happen. He was halfway there, the city speeding past below him, by the time Peter tried to strike up a conversation again. Tony's monitor told him that Peter had already incapacitated 2 of them, 3 left. Of course, that was when Peter's AI decided to inform Friday that Peter was out of web fluid. Of course he was. "Hey, hold up a second, time out," Peter said to the robbers, as though criminals were generally fans of just listening to the person trying to stop them. Then again, maybe Tony severely underestimated his own approach to stopping crime, because the 3 men paused a moment, exchanging equally confused looks with each other, similar to the one that graced Tony's furrowed brows. "Something doesn't feel right," Spider-Man declared, entirely oblivious to the 3 separate guns pointed right at his chest. Theoretically, that suit should be bulletproof, but Tony couldn't trust that these were everyday thugs with normal guns. because there had been an irritating resurgence of Chitauri tech popping up. But God, all he could hope was that he could get there in time. "Hey, I think maybe you should get out of here," Peter carried on. Ignorant to Tony's anxieties, he whipped his head around the bank as though looking for a sign of what was up. "I'm getting this spidey sense that something is happening here right now, and you guys don't want to get caught up in whatever it is." Watching through the live video feed, he could see in his helmet, Tony saw Peter twirl around the space, not getting too close to the criminals to startle them into shooting him, but that didn't mean their guns were suddenly lowered. Instead, they simply kept it trained on Spider-Man, who appeared to just be wandering aimlessly. Friday alerted him that Tony was only 2 minutes out from the robbery. He urged his suit to go faster still. "The hell kind of tactic is this, huh?" one of the criminals finally asked on the third round of Peter circling the room looking for the source of what was setting off the spider sense. "You trying to intimidate me, huh? Ain't gonna work, buddy. We've been doing this longer than you've been alive." 1 minute until he arrived. "Huh?" Peter questioned, ignoring the threat and defensive way the man held his gun, cradling it to his chest like Spider-Man would try to whip it out of his hands with his webs, just as he had done for the man's companions. His other 2 goons lurked ominously in the background, exchanging uncertain looks at what Spider-Man was playing at. "You, with your freaky alien shit, trying to make us ditch the cash. We got it fair and square. Well, we got it square anyway." In a move both equally stupid and brave, the man stepped forward, gesturing at Spider-Man with the barrel of his gun. "Now you get out of here, let us take the money, and we won't do nothing to you." Tony watched as Peter just shook his head dismissively, clearly insinuating he would not be letting the whole robbery situation go, but still too preoccupied with his damn spidey sense to notice as the man shrugged and took aim. It was thankfully right at that moment that Tony arrived, crashing through the window and jetting himself into the trigger-happy man right before he could shoot Spider-Man. The blast, which, by the way, was definitely Chitauri tech, because Tony was correct, as per always, missed Peter's face by inches. Tony careened the both of them into the wall. Fortunately, he just so happened to be encased in a protective metal suit of armour. The robber did not fare quite so well. "Kid!" he shouted out when the other 2 men, still free, began firing at both the heroes, the situation having quite suddenly and explosively gone from bad to much, much worse very quickly. Although he couldn't keep his eyes on him, struggling as he was with the gang leader in his arms, Tony trusted Peter to keep himself out of the way of the blasts that could very much kill him at any moment. Spider-Man seemed to have disappeared when he finally turned around, knocking his guy out with a sharp hit to the temple, perhaps more harshly than necessary, but it's not like he could just let someone get away with treating Spider-Man like that. It was only harsh on principle, not because Tony was scared at how close that had almost been or anything. He swept his gaze across the scene. One of the goons had been knocked out by what seemed to be a kick to the head if the footprint on his face was to be trusted. The other looked positively terrified, the barrel of his gun sweeping across the room, not sure of where its next target would come from. Just as Tony had lined up a shot with one of his non-lethal ammunition to take the last one out, he noticed an ominous vague shape scuttle across the ceiling. The robber had finally decided to just aim at the one opponent he could see. Mere seconds before he could pull the trigger that would have taken Tony out, a foot darted down from the roof. Peter kicked the man in the back of the head from his convenient perch around the light fixtures. Tony could do little more than sigh in relief as the final man went down. The situation diffused. He was about to chastise the kid for being so damn foolish when he was hushed, Peter tapping a finger to where his lips would be beneath the mask. "Shh, I can't feel it," Peter said, peering suspiciously around. "Feel what?" Tony matched his hushed tone, still adequately cautious of more invaders. "My spidey sense is quiet." "Huh." Tony rolled his eyes. "Yes, you idiot. You were facing down 5 guys with superior tech, while you had no webs." "Oh yeah, that makes sense. Right." Peter nodded along happily, not at all concerned with the way Tony's heart was just about ready to implode from the stress and anxiety coursing through his veins. "Well, thanks for the help. See you later, Mr. Stark." Peter waved happily at him before running back out into the street to head home after a job well done. Holy shit. "Kid, what's wrong now?" Tony asked wearily. He was too busy trying to fix the broken stabilizers of his suit to look up, but he had spent enough time around Peter to know just by the sound of him shuffling back and forth on his feet and his breathing in heavily through his nose, something was up. "Oh, nothing? Yeah, it's, nothing," Peter said in the least convincing possible way. Tony rolled his eyes, still not bothering to glance back at where Peter would presumably still be stumbling around in front of one of the lab desks. Normally, the times Tony let him work on his web shooters, or whatever it was the kid felt like making, they worked peacefully in relative silence. Well, as silent as Peter can be. But it was good enough for Tony. Not that he would admit it, but when Peter got like that, the whole shuffling uncomfortably and not saying anything, that's when Tony got concerned. If nothing else, his whole adventure in mentoring a teenager had taught him that they were terrible at asking for help. Well, Peter was, and it's not like Tony had many other youths just wandering around in his life, so he was probably correct in assuming the rest were the same. "Kid, just spit it out. I can hear you thinking from here." Tony let a small smile make its way across his face while he focused on tightening a screw, never too caught up on his work to miss the way Peter would huff in that faux irritated fashion when he got called out on badly hiding it when something was wrong. It was frankly astounding that he still had a secret identity, considering how truly awful he was at lying. "Mr. Stark, it's seriously not a big deal." Tony's snort of disbelief seemed to finally be enough to convince Peter to just say something. "Okay, well fine then. You're going to think I'm being dumb again?" "You say that like I ever stopped." "Rude." Tony could hear the smile in the kid's voice. "Whatever. I was just going to say that I think my spidey sense is picking up on something, but not in the usual way." At that, Tony slowed his hands, halting his work just to listen out for if the kid was going to explain. He didn't bother turning around, because as he had learned, the so-called spidey sense was a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes it could very conveniently alert Peter to where danger was coming from. Sometimes it would just alert him that danger existed in general, and the kid would get too caught up in trying to figure out where it was coming from to even notice when it was right in front of him. And sometimes it was just some kind of enhanced anxiety he seemed to be cursed with. But considering they were just laying low in his lab, and Peter himself did not seem immediately concerned about anyone's imminent death, it was most likely to have been that final variety of spidey sense. "In what way is it unusual? Come on, you know I'm not a mind reader. Using words might just help me out a bit." Peter huffed a self-conscious laugh. He was probably rubbing the back of his head the way he did when he made simple mistakes in front of Tony, never truly getting over the fact that actual Tony Stark was paying attention to him. "Okay, well, normally spidey sense feels more like the tingling in the back of my head that tells me when there's danger, and I'm getting that now, but also it's all up the back of my arm, so I don't know what that is meant to mean." Tony sighed, closing his eyes and spinning around in his chair to address the apparently unending weirdness that was Peter's powers. Every time he learned something new about them, it seemed to be equally as much a revelation to Peter himself. Of course, Tony's thoughts very quickly left his begrudging amusement at Peter's general predicament as soon as he saw the true case of the tingling sensation. "Peter, you're on fire!" he shouted, leaping from his chair the instant he noticed the flames licking up the boy's back and arm. Peter at first didn't register what had just been said, too preoccupied and scrambling away in surprise at Tony's sudden charge across the lab. Once he registered the pretty damn obvious fact that Tony wasn't just going to attack him, Peter looked down to his left arm, which was indeed very much aflame. For a moment he was relieved, pleased to see that there was a legitimate reason behind the sudden development of his spidey sense. That calm was soon interrupted by the revelation that he was on fire. "Holy shit!" Peter hissed, waving his arm about maniacally as though that would be enough to quell the ever-growing collection of flames that had attached themselves to him. Tony decided right then and there to never be mean to his bots again, because Dummy, for once in his life, did the right thing and anticipated that Tony would very much be in need of a fire extinguisher. He took it, gripping it tightly in his hand, and sprayed the foam all over Peter. Mostly to get at the fire, but at least part of the excess amount of spray was punishment for stressing him out with his foolishness. It's like Peter actively wanted to see how long it would take before he did something dumb enough to give Tony a heart attack. When the hiss of the extinguisher died out, and there was no more frantic movement by concerned men or surprised teenagers, the only sound that could be heard was Tony's ragged breathing. He got it under control quickly enough, but not before he made sure Peter noticed the glare he was sending the boy's way. Peter just grinned sheepishly back at him. "New lab rule," Tony declared. "No children on fire." "Yeah, that seems fair," Peter agreed amicably, probably still a bit wary of the extinguisher that Tony had not lessened his tight grip on. He was too busy being prepared for Peter to somehow spontaneously combust into flames again to notice the reproachful look he made at his now-soaked shirt. Peter lifted the damp material away from him to check out the scorch marks that resided across his arms and shoulders. "Damn, I liked this shirt," he pouted. "Too bad," Tony said with zero empathy. "You get to complain only when you don't light yourself up. Wait, no, you don't get to complain full stop. Nobody that unknowingly does what you just did has earned the right to complain." Tony finally lowered the fire extinguisher, satisfied that nothing too dramatic was about to happen again. "Speaking of, how the hell did you manage that? And more importantly, how were you not aware?" Peter's bashful shuffling returned. "Well, I don't know about the first thing. Seriously," he added earnestly at Tony's disbelieving look. "I literally don't know. I didn't mean to do it or anything. And for the second part, I kind of just assumed the feeling was my spidey sense, you know? It made sense. They're weirdly similar sensations." Tony sighed, rolling his eyes for what felt like the 100th time, just as he normally did any time he spent an extended period of time with the kid. How did one child even manage to get himself into so many ludicrous situations? "All right, go clean yourself up, kid. And do me a favour, just for the sake of my general health, and just don't do that again." He didn't think it was all that necessary to address the sudden surging of feelings that had occurred when he saw Peter was in danger. Considering that Tony was allergic to anything that resembled proper emotions, it was somewhat concerning just how much he felt every time he saw Peter throw himself into harm's way. And as he had just learned apparently, he also had strong feelings towards Peter just being a threat to himself. Vaguely, some part of him wondered if he would ever get over those stressful feelings of care and worry about Peter. But as he watched the boy trip over his own feet on his way out the door, and Tony naturally leant forward to give him a hand, he figured that, no, he probably wouldn't be getting over them anytime soon.